Well, I am here delighted to be here with my dear friend and confidant and partner on recruiting efforts, Ron Jordan. Ron and I have known each other really basically through the entire pandemic. We started working together, I think, at the very, very beginning and working on important efforts to grow the number of diverse hires at K&L Gates, but really want to take this conversation, as we do with all conversations with great leaders who make a change in the world, by understanding a little bit about Ron's story, his passion for the game, his passion for this industry, and how he thinks we can all play a role in making that change. So welcome, Ron. Thank you for doing this.
Thanks, Craig, for having me. Carter White and Shaw and some of our affiliate partners are happy to enter this partnership with K&L Gates, whereas some others have not didn't get the memo, as you had alluded to earlier. You know, 3 international banks are put themselves together to actively recruit diverse talent within the financial services market. You know, my story's pretty simple. If I could be so blunt, black kid from Berkeley. Many colleges later got in the staffing industry, saw some of the inadequate and disparaging ways that professionals of color, even in the greater Bay Area, where I grew up, were not being taken as seriously. It was almost like a dare when I met Bob Majors at Majors Lindsay, and I told him where I wanted to specialize, and he very bluntly said that the recruitment of blacks and diverse attorneys of color was a fad, which I found appalling. But it was a challenge to take my mother's gift. And what I mean by that is my mom had an incredible ability to recruit people into doing things that either she was overwhelmed by or just didn't feel like doing. And I was one of those recruits. But that ability to communicate effectively with people around her from her church or in our community was pretty amazing. It's one of the talents I picked up, and through law firms and their partnerships and in-house counsel have allowed me to hone that, along with the National Bar Association, HBNBA, and NAPABA, and getting to know people on a personal level. Tell you a short story. When I was a kid growing up in San Francisco, my dad, who hails from Louisiana, and met my mom, who's also from Louisiana, in San Francisco. There were like clubs of people that hail from different parts of the country. That's where they met, and they got married a few years before I came along. Their bundle of great joy, which probably caused them more conservation in their lifetimes than they imagined. My dad was a journeyman mechanic after World War II and came to San Francisco for jobs, but he was not allowed to join the union, which San Francisco was a union town, but blacks weren't allowed to join. He met a young black attorney at church who was one of the top students in his class at Hastings back in the late 50s. And if you're in the top of your class, as we all look for that type of talent, devoid of color, sexual orientation, or gender, you should be able to get a job. Well, that didn't happen. So he opened up his own firm in the Fillmore, which was at one time one of the largest black sections of blacks in San Francisco. It's now considered Upper Pacific Heights, with real estate prices to go with it, and opened up his own practice of door law. You know, and that took me a long time to figure out what that meant, but whatever came through the dough. So he took my dad's case. He sued the AFL-CIO, beat them, helped get my dad a job, secured his position working for a union house. That propelled that young man to our state house, where he came under the tutelage and the wing of the bagman for the Democrats, Jesse Unruh, the most powerful man in California, eventually moving to the Speaker of the House in California, becoming so powerful. It was probably the most powerful Democrat in the state of California, to the point where they came up with term limits and sent him packing back to San Francisco. where he ran for mayor and was elected the first black mayor of San Francisco for 2 consecutive terms. His intervention in my life before I even knew he existed probably put a seed in my dad's head to tell me much later on in my life that Willie Brown was very instrumental in keeping this bundle of joy fed. Being enamored by that kind of courage really put me on a path that I didn't expect. Meeting Bill Hasty when his firm imploded in San Francisco, finding him an opportunity with Music Peeler and Garrett in L.A., and him my mentor for the last 30 years. But coupled with that, more important than anything, is that Bill Hasty Jr. gave me the historical context of black lawyers and lawyers of color in the United States, his father being the first African-American appointed to the federal bench, which entailed me meeting William Coleman Jr. and staying at his home and meeting Mr. Powell and other noted people in our news that this young man now living on a farm in Maryland would never have thought.
Yeah. Oh, that's great, Ron. And you know, a little known fact, you are the second client conversation podcast participant who has been directly influenced by Willie Brown. Rich Nichols, who I think you know, also shares that. I can't even think about how many young men and women Willie Brown positively impacted. It's quite a legacy. And so when did you get that seed in your head? I know you've got that great story about your mom and really how she even led you to a client, if I recall the story correctly, when you went back to Louisiana for a football game, if I'm remembering the story correctly. But when did you get that passion to say, hey, this is my why. This is the thing that needs fixing. This is what needs Ron Jordan's attention.
Well, really in the beginning, working in the staffing industry, my first job, I'd gone to Berkeley and I left school at the right age of 28, not knowing that I had any discernible skills to give the marketplace. So I joined a staffing company, General Employment Enterprises. And one of the things that was very discouraging to me, even in a very diverse office as we had, because my mentor was a gay man, Dennis Billingsley, who I still stay in touch with after all these years, was the way that people of color were treated, even in the staffing industry. I remember most disheartening was a young man that I had met that was from the Philippines, and he had worked for Arthur Andersen, at that time the largest CPA firm in the world. He comes to San Francisco with that resume, and one of my colleagues that sat next to me needed an accounts payable exec. He said, how about your candidate? I said, he's a CPA. He's certified by Arthur Andersen. The client hired him, but that's all he could get. But that really unsettled me about how people of color in general, and blacks particularly, were not treated fairly. They had gone to the right schools, they had done the right things, they had worked hard, they were ambitious like many of your partners. And it just stuck with me that, the staffing industry teaches you how to cold call. So you don't have, if you have trepidation about that, you can't make it. I had to make 100 phone calls a day to cope to people I didn't even know, that many, after all these years, become friends and colleagues. But that was the one thing that really burned me more than anything, was that I was meeting these great professionals, and the law is a very special thing in my life. So it didn't make sense to me in one of the more liberal places, if not the most progressive place in the country, could not see that there was black and diverse talent just sitting there waiting to be hired. When I started the business in 1991, the San Francisco Bar Association had a mandate to increase diversity within the top AM 100 firms. Orrick, Eller doesn't exist. Thielen doesn't exist. Mofo. That number was 3% as a goal. I left California in 2001. That number has never gotten above overall 1.5%, and that was something that was really. This is 30 years ago, so it was one of those numbers that's been stuck in my head ever since then. And, I had clients like Sunshine, Nathan Rosenthal, Brown, A. Brown and Bonstein, mid-sized firms that would hire women and people of color. But the traction that I wanted, insertion into the legal search market, I was not getting in California. So Marg and I were living in Carmel. And in 2000, I went to an ABA conference on diversity in the bar put on by the ABA. San Yamate was the director at the time. Now she runs the Center of Inclusiveness. And my mentor, Bill Hasty, was there. And someone asked the innocuous question about, what you could do with your law degree if you didn't want to be a lawyer. And someone said, be a recruiter. And there were about 400 people in the room. I was standing in the back because it was a standing room only. I guess there were a lot of disaffected lawyers that wanted to be more, do something else than practice law and do billable hours. And someone made a call that they had never met a black recruiter. And Bill stood up as he was the moderator and said, there's one right there. And everyone turned around and looked at me. And I was like, oh, no, I was hoping to make, small and intimate conversations. But people came up to me, Craig. It was so weird. I'd never experienced this. It was back in the briefcase days. People had their resumes in their briefcase, and they were shoving them to me. I was like, whoa, yeah, I'm here on vacation. Great experience. It stuck with me. My wife, Margaret, and I came to visit her mom here in Chestertown. And it just, it was like that bright idea moment. I don't know what you call it. Light bulb went off that one of the things that the DMV is very well known for is the highest concentration of black wealth in the country, in Montgomery County. And that all derives from the alphabet soup of agencies on the Hill and the multitude of black and diverse attorneys that those agencies employ. So we go back to Carmel. I can't get this place out of my mind. The housing prices in Chestertown are insanely low compared to living in Carmel, California. So I convinced my bride then of 1 year to move back to the East Coast. And kicking and screaming, she followed me. We sold our home in Carmel. We bought the farm here. And I basically did what I've always done, which is to be involved, show up, talk to people, met people like Ben Wilson, got his story. He was introduced to me by Mr. Coleman. So for the last 20 years, I've just been putting one foot after the other and seeking like-minded firms like K&L. Now, mind you, when I first came to K&L, Kayla's always told me the same thing. No, no. And eventually, I met Melissa, I met you and Pavi, and the rest of the team. And I finally got a yes. And the yes was emphatic. And what I mean by this, I know the commitment is strong when a partner during the pandemic gets in a car and drives 546 miles by car to meet a candidate in Louisville, Kentucky, to have lunch. Mm-hmm. That says a lot about a firm. It says a lot about their partners. Jared Mobley is a part and parcel of what K&L is trying to accomplish. More needs to be done, mind you. I've known Paul Sweeney for a very long time. I know what he's done down there. I know of Robert Kirk. Someone told me one time at a reunion that we were relatives, but I think he's more akin to the former American ambassador, Robert Kirk.
They call each other brothers. Yeah.
They're my family. But, it's the little things that give us pause with great hope. I mean,
I think you can safely say that all professional service firms, your comment, the news at the top of the hour in the Wall Street Journal today is that investment banking firms are banding together to invest in changing the diversity at their shops. Everyone has work to do, and anybody who doesn't think they have work to do is part of the problem, probably. But Bill Kirk and Ron Kirk, Bill, of course, our partner in D.C., a fabulous public policy lawyer, and Ron Kirk, who was the mayor of Dallas, my home city, and a great man. They are separated at birth. They are very close, and I made that. I kind of stumbled on that connection. But tell me, you've written so much on this topic, and I suspect we could talk for hours and go through the history and the evolution of the changes that were made in legal recruiting in the diverse space. But you wrote an article in 2018 that basically said people just aren't mad enough yet. Talk a little bit about what you meant back in 2018, that firms aren't mad enough, people aren't mad enough, and what have you seen in the last 3 years that is positive in the diverse hiring space?
Well, when I say you're not mad enough, I think it's an old civil rights phrase that when you get mad enough to do something, it's an actionable item. Now, you can either do it violently, but you should do it more intellectually. Some firms have taken it on as a strategic part of their business plan, not as a one-off as far as pro bono. Diversity recruitment and hiring and retention is not a pro bono play. It's very much a strategic play. And let me go off just for a second. We know the changing demographics in this country. There are more people of color, more births, more than white births. And of those numbers, we're going to find some professionals that in the next 20, 30 years are going to supply the talent for law firms. If you didn't get the memo and you're not mad enough now, you should be mad. There is a finite amount of diverse attorneys of color within the United States, but there are more people going to law school, more so in business school. If you're actively seeking diverse talent, I am just one tool in the toolbox, but there are organizations like CLEO, there are within the bars of color, there are Black Law Students Association, the HNBA, the NAPABA, law students, there's career services outside of predominantly black law schools like Howard, but there's North Carolina Central in the part of the Research Triangle. A little side story, one of my Iranian college mates became a microbiologist when he got out of Berkeley, and then was transferred by his pharmaceutical company to the Triangle. He went to school at nighttime at North Carolina Central. I've said this so many times, Greg, I get blue in the face. You want to find the most highly prized scientists with a law degree. They're going to night school at North Carolina Central in Raleigh. You just stand at the door and you'll find every PhD that you could possibly find. But a lot of people discount North Carolina Central. Everybody goes to Howard. That's the home of Thurgood Marshall and other notable black attorneys. But there are schools. University of Santa Clara has one of the most diverse law schools in the country, sitting in the Silicon Valley. It's a Catholic school. You got computer scientists, electrical engineers going to school at nighttime. Many of them people of color trying to leave either the high tech or, find a leg up in the high tech world. So when I say you're not mad enough, when you're mad at doing something about something, you work harder to get it done. The coach on the sidelines, y'all got to get mad. Otherwise, we're going to lose this game. And that's the way I look at this business, the legal search business as well as law firms. We were on a losing streak when the recession came around. When I say we, attorneys of color and blacks in general, it has come back. There are more firms taking the time to actively be participants in organizations like CLEO and BALSA and, where law students of color are located. If not at the schools themselves, the organizations. Each of the law students of color have their own conventions. Your firm and everybody else's firm should be there. Show up. I was talking to a small client in Connecticut whose partner teaches at Yale Law School, and she said, well, I'm not comfortable. I said, well, get comfortable. Your firm's going to die. So, it's a matter of getting mad and about survival. This is the key to the kingdom is within your grasp. Get beyond your fears and your biases. We go, it's our conscious, unconscious, implicit bias. A lot of times that comes down to bigotry and discrimination and prejudice. Get beyond it. We're grown-ass people. We're very intelligent, hardworking, we take care of our families. Throw those biases out the door. Your mere survival is depending on capturing the attention of this very woke, as they say, community is coming behind us. Many of these folks will be in your firm and have been retired. That is my hope. But you have to put your fingers, your claws into your hands on their shoulders and guide them now. I have said many times that what big law does is they go to the wells of talent, and when the well runs dry, instead of digging a new well, they just stand there and wait for it to rain again. Well, that could take years. If you don't develop the relationships with those communities at those schools that you recruit from and others that you don't, there'll always be a lack of. Yeah. And your clients, which is we're watching, Coca-Cola. I think Bradley Guyton did a great thing. He took heat for it. He had to resign and have a new general counsel. But the one thing that caught my eye, Craig, was that he said within 5 years, the majority of the work was going to go to black attorneys. That was a death knell. It shouldn't have been, considering that black attorneys are the lowest denominator when it comes to big law partners and associates. I thought that was a very courageous thing, but he took the heat for it. I got a call from a client, in fact, that said she was wringing her hands. What are we going to do? I said, change relationship partner. Make a woman and a person of color's relationship partner, Coca-Cola, keep the work, and advance the cause, which is happening. And lastly, I would say this. Law firms have to know that there is a big four boogeyman at their doorstep, and that's called the Big Four. They are actively seeking diverse attorneys in the tax and financial services area. They can't be true law firms because it's against the law here. You have alternative legal services that are coming to take the market share from big law. So there's more options for diversity. Other, and the other is in-house counsel who can be your proponents in maybe shaping the strategy of the firm. Those are your paymasters. It's not necessarily hard to recruit people. What is hard is retention.
Right.
The onboarding, a process in place, sponsors and mentorship. There's a small firm in New York that I work with. They have a booklet, step-by-step booklet on how to onboard all their attorneys, but paying special attention to attorneys of color because they're so small. And the retention is probably 98%. Well, that's the basis for the next line of partners. We're seeing more women that are becoming managing partners. Clyco, which is one of the largest insurance defense firms in the world, just made the new managing partner of the Americas. The sad part about Clyco is they don't have any black people, and they don't think that's important. For a lot of our across-the-pond competition that's coming in, they have not been brought to task like the American counterparts. I think that's sad. That's just my opinion.
Let me go back to a thread you touched on, which is the retention or the integration of a new partner or lawyer of color. I mean, look, we're all getting faced with clients, whether it's as direct as Guyton was with Coke, or clients saying, look, you're going to get less of a share of our spend if you don't have specific metrics of lawyers of color working on our matters, diverse lawyers getting credit for our matters, things like that. So we're advancing in the what I'd call motivation category. But you touched on something that was really interesting to me, which is the retention and the integration of those partners. What are some touchstone principles that you've seen in your 30 years of doing this plus of successful retention and integration efforts for diverse lawyers?
Well, the first step is to have sponsors and mentors. Now, there's a difference. Sponsors help an associate, mind you, get good work, help them with the writing ability, turn out, efficient work on client matters. A mentor is that person, a partner preferably, or senior counsel, that has those intimate conversations that are privileged on who they are as a person, who they want to become as a lawyer, and how that fits into the culture of that particular firm. In this case, your firm. What flaws they may see. The mentor is allowed to tell both the positive and the negative without mentioning who said what. The sponsor has the ability to push forth that candidate to the higher echelons of the organization. Onboarding is really important in establishing those relationships. No associate in any firm should be wanting for work, but also the associates have to ask for work. And that is a trait some people don't get. They didn't get that memo either. You can't wait for work to pop in your hand. You want to be a part of a viable organization, show your worth. You got to ask for work. I realize that, with as we're coming out of the pandemic, there's going to be a war. The war is on as far as associate compensation is concerned. Making more money is important to everybody, but making more money and not being respected, and you as an associate not respecting that partner or senior counsel, it's just not a good thing. I mean, it won't work. The culture of the firm is the culture of the firm. It should be explained. It should be told. I'll just go back to Bobby, for example. I was really excited when I heard about Bobby's story, but me hearing about it as a legal recruiter doesn't mean anything. The world's got to know where she comes from, who she is. It says a lot about your firm, about where she is in the higher ranks as a woman and a woman of color. I mean, we celebrated, many of us, not all of us, but I did celebrate my old city mate, Kamala Harris. She's from Berkeley, as a woman of color, Asian woman of color. Bobby came before her. We should have been celebrating that, Maybe it was pretend for things to come. The job as a legal recruiter is not hard, but it's challenging. When you have partners that are willing to take a look at people that may have a little flaw, a little ding, you take that chance. You take a risk that you would take for white folks. Simple. Mm-hmm. That's when the playing field becomes equal. I always tell a story about, I had 3 streams of revenue when I got to the East Coast. It was going to be law firms, it was going to be in-house corporate, and it was going to be folks coming off the Hill. There's not enough time to tell you the story, but one of the people that I met was a candidate of mine, left the Hill, took me to law firms, and everybody said the same thing. Where's his book of business? Book of business coming off the Hill? You never ask white guys about that. But eventually, he helped a small social media company. They couldn't pay him, so they gave him stock options. The company went public. He became a multimillionaire. That company was Facebook. So he ain't got to work again. But what's sad about that story, Craig, is that he'll never want for money again. But it still gets stuck in his craw after all these years that the firms that turned him down could have had Facebook as a client. But they denied him that opportunity because they didn't put the same standards on him as it did white guys coming off the Hill. One day, when you're back out here, I'll introduce you to him. He's quite a character.
Yeah, I like that. So speak, Ron, to the self-proclaimed tolerant partner of a professional services firm who is a part of the recruitment process. How does that person check for their implicit bias? I interviewed on the podcast a few months back the great Dean Song Richardson, and she talked about how she studied, race anxiety and how to basically wring as much of that implicit bias as you can out of the process. But talk to those people who they want to hire more lawyers of color. They're all in. They want to follow your directions. How then do they execute on the interview process in a way that manages for that implicit bias?
Well, you state it, One of the things I like about the law, it's about the truth. Now talk about in court, but just as a general principle, as a civilized society, the law is based on the truth. I think that when someone is interviewing, say you're interviewing me, you plainly state that. I have worked on my anti-racism bias. I've done this. And see, Craig, when a person is honest about their bias, the candidate, especially the candidate of color, is going to be more susceptible to listening and thinking of you as a potential employer. One of the things that is very disconcerting is that when you tell the truth about where you are as an employer, and that's not falling on your sword, but telling the truth. I'm from Mississippi. But when you talk to people truthfully about where you're from and your mindset, where the firm was, where the firm is, and where the firm is going, and why you, as the white guy, wants to hire this person of color, you tell the truth about it. This is where I was in college. This is where I was in law school. This is where I was when I started my family. These are my interactions. And I realize that I still have some blind spots. But because of those blind spots, the best way for me to entice you to come to my firm is to be honest with you about those blind spots. My firm has blind spots. We tolerate a lot of stuff, but we're beyond the point of toleration and to the point of embracing. Law firms are not known for embracing or nurturing. That's not your job. Your job is to practice law and make money, plain and simple. But people also want to be part of a family. Part of a culture of any partnership is family. It's been said that law firm partners spend more time with their partners than they do in their marriages. And when people move and break up, it is gut-wrenching because they spent all their time, from the time they were an associate to they all become partners. It's been a collective effort, even in different practice areas, that we all made it. This is the big kahuna. I think you can still say that. And when someone leaves, you want to know why. It's not necessarily about money. It's about the culture's change. But did it change for the better, not the worse? I want to see all my clients do better in the recruitment areas, but I also want them to be honest with interviewees, whether they be for me or anybody else, because that's a tale of the tape. One of the things I said earlier about Poppy, part of the truth-telling, the reconciliation, kind of like what South Africa did during their post-apartheid days, no one was punished for their stupidity or their prejudices. What was great is that people came to the realization that they did exist. And yes, there were atrocities that happened, but there was no punishment. There was public shame, but there was no punishment. Because sometimes acknowledging our biases gives us a new sense of freedom. It helps us not only with our partners and our associates, it also helps our families in our communities. Someone said to me the other day, when you are, and I'll go back to being not mad enough, when you're mad enough, it's an actionable item. You will do something about it because no one likes feeling bad. Living in this world is exhausting enough, just living. So if you can take the weight of those biases and prejudices off you and be honest with the candidate. Now, you may lose a candidate because you have been honest, or you might really endear yourself to that candidate because they're not going to hear it from anybody else. So if you really want to close a candidate, you've just got to be honest. Now, that's a very vulnerable place to be. Yeah, it's scary.
Yeah, it seems like, I feel a progression of that during COVID. I feel like people are more vulnerable with each other just generally. And I do think that the level of, people, as Song Richardson and I discussed, everybody comes with bias. We are born with bias. We're not born with bias, but we develop quickly bias because we're around people and we don't have the ability to check our assumptions that people share with us when we're little. And then they get baked into who we are. And so I love that message of yours that when you're vulnerable and you share those bias, you're at least in touch with them, and you give the other person the confidence to say, well, this person is really working hard to get around those. And oh, by the way, I've got my own set of biases that I'm bringing to the table, and I can let those down. I can focus on those, and we can start connecting, and whatever our skin color is, whatever our ethnicity or religion or whatever the thing is that's separating us at the moment. I love that. All right, tell me a few personal things, because you've achieved the top of the game in this business. You're always threatening to retire, but I don't see that anytime soon, even though your golf game seems to be strong. What's the one thing where Ron Jordan failed? He absolutely failed, and he had to look deep inside and say, wow, I screwed that up, but here's what I'm going to learn from it. What was that one thing?
I'll never forget this. I won't say the attorney's name. I was at the NBA in Atlanta. It was like one of the first couple that I'd gone to. I was standing at the bar with some friends, and this lawyer walks by and says, he ain't nothing but a slave trader. In essence, what he's selling, I was selling black souls, black talent, without any consciousness of where they were going, why they were doing, what was the best fit for the talents, either from potential clients or bringing them to my client's firm. Now, I didn't think I was, but it made me check myself. It made me think, Craig, what's more important, money or reputation? If you do it based on making the right fit, concerned about the candidate and the client, the money will come. And I mean, I've always believed that, but when time gets tough, money kind of takes the precedence. But what I end up doing is having a set of principles that I wrote down, and I'll just tell you briefly. Candidates must be respected. You don't recommend or refer a candidate unless you know them. You don't talk to clients just to make a placement. You get to know them. The legal search business, one of the reasons I never joined NASLIC is because of this one factor. In a world that we've seen for the last few years with the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Aubrey, and almost a daily basis of black men and women being shot in our streets for no apparent reason, I had to make sure I did the right thing for the right reason. The legal search firm business has not made a statement on their website about diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's why I never joined them. And I've tried and insist upon that, because we are the conduit to a lot of candidates across the board to you all. If we as an organization don't believe that diversity, equity, and inclusion is important, that just puts us back in the 1970s, which was like the ABA had an experimental program back in the 70s to see if black people were responsible enough to join the organization. That's basically what we're saying as legal recruiters. We're not there yet to make a statement that would blanket legal business that already has gotten there for many times. So my challenge to my own organization is that if we can't say it, then how can we represent people that we say that we want to bring to our client's firm? We all have to stand tall in what we believe in. My big firm clients are a very small portfolio, because these are the people like you and Bobby and Paul that I can rely on and have real conversation. Many off record because they don't need to be on the record. But when I talk to a candidate that I'm recruiting for your firm or marketing to you, I can truly say, this is where they were, this is where they're at, and this is where they're going. And in our business, if we cannot tell the truth about where we think our clients are going, then we are really basing our talents on slavery. We're just asking somebody to go work, get paid, go in handcuffs, and then there's no upper mobility either in their organization or leaving. I don't want to be that guy. And you're right. I keep threatening to retire. But what I enjoy about the job is that I get to meet so many engaging individuals, both people of color or not, that we can have conversations. Whether we agree politically or not is really immaterial. I've had probably the best education about the law, then God forbid they let me go to law school. And I'm glad they didn't let me go to law school. My cousin, who's a judge down in Orange County, told me I could never be a lawyer because I hate authority. I'm sure if I was in his courtroom, he'd probably sanction me most of the time because I tell him he was out of order.
I don't know, Thurgood Marshall, your inspiration, or one of them certainly. He couldn't afford to respect authority either because he had to change it. Wasn't worthy of respect. I think you would have made a good lawyer. But go ahead. Sorry.
It's a grand profession. I mean, I've been very blessed to meet some of the greatest legal scholars that I never thought I would have the chance to ever meet. It was not something that was in my plan for this little black kid back in Berkeley, California. I wanted to be a teacher, but I have a little problem with going to class, so that was out. So I kind of made up my own job. The fortunate thing, after looking back all these years, is that there are more young people, grasping this industry, both technologically, because I'm an old school OG, by the horns, and making it more suitable as well as accessible to all attorneys, but especially attorneys of color. But the bottom line still comes down to relationships. Personal relationships, and that's what I miss about seeing people physically. Yesterday I was playing golf, and the guy shook my hand. He said, "We can do that now." I said, "You vaccinated?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "I was going to shake your hand anyway because I'm vaccinated."
Yeah.
So don't worry about it. Lawyers are fairly, more often than not, they're social creatures. I mean, the relationships that you build they come from social interactions. For someone to trust your company with their legal issues is saying a lot. Something could go south on you in court. The deal might go awry. There could be some sketchy moments, but it all comes down to the general counsel trust your judgment when it comes to legal issues in the court. And especially in the court of public opinion. How a firm is perceived by potential employees is one thing, but in the greater financial markets, in the greater world, it's the humanity of a firm, if we can even talk about humanity. But we're in a different era that a law firm has an obligation to show their humanity. There's been a lot of pledges of social injustice this, and we are going to do this. And I always think in the back of my mind, you can pledge $10 million to social injustice issues and initiatives, but where are those lawyers going to come from that may have to go out there and be the Thurgood Marshalls or the Judge Carters and the Constance Motley Bakers and the Elaine Jones? Where are they going to get the legal skills besides the skills in their practice, so when their communities come to them and ask for their help? That's where money should be spent. Mm-hmm. Is where, when Martin Luther King was being jailed in Birmingham, he had a black lawyer. Every social injustice warrior on every side has a lawyer that's in the background helping them to get back out and be the activists they can. But they have to be taught how to be good lawyers. Diversity, equity, and inclusion recruitment for diverse attorneys of color is not a pro bono play. It's a strategic play. Mm-hmm. How can we strengthen the legal skills of our lawyers? How can we help them develop more relationships? But more so than anything, if they decide to take on the matter of injustice in the communities of color or the LGBTQ community or the disabled community, do we as a law firm feel comfortable in what we've taught them to protect this community?
Yep, it's connection and advocacy. I mean, I think those are great touchstone principles. It actually makes me very proud because we I don't want to say stumbled on it, but I was a debater, as you know, in high school and college, and my wife and I started a program that's now all over the country. We weren't the first one. There was one in Chicago and a few other, one in Baltimore actually, but to fund inner city high schools and now middle schools policy debate programs, so that these are schools primarily of color, and giving them those advocacy skills so that they could be in a position, if they choose to be lawyers or physicians or accountants or whatever their profession might be, but they know how to connect. They know how to advocate in a way that connects to their audience. So last question, Ron, because we're out of time, but I gotta know this. I know you're a reader. You've got books right above your shoulder. You mentioned Martin Luther King sitting in a Birmingham jail. Of course, there was a famous letter written during that experience. Is there something that you've read, or a graduation speech or something, any homework you would give those listening to the podcast to say, this is something I read, a book, saw a speech, read a letter that changed me, and you would recommend it to those of us who are trying to be change agents, trying to be sponsors, trying to be allies?
Now, I'm going to give you a book that it was, and it still is, it was the hardest book for me to read. And if you give me a second, I'll pull it up.
Yeah.
It goes against everything that I believe in. When I think about this subject with all my heart and all the energies I have, it to a great extent, it's like my political views. I have to hear the other side, even if it sounds ridiculous and wonky or insane to me. So a guy wrote by Peter Wood, it's called Diversity, the Invention of a Concept Called Diversity. Let's see, hold that up.
Okay.
It goes against everything that I believe in. But most lawyers are based the whole premise of being a lawyer on logic. This is illogical. Even the people that write, like Shelby Steele and Ward Conley from the great state of California, write the footnotes. I recommend that anybody can get a copy, read it, and it's a trudge. It's like, the Bataan Death March for me.
Uh-huh.
I've read it twice. It's hard. But if you have any hope in that what we're doing, not just legal recruiting, but the entire industry, the Fortune 500, you have to read it because it could help and reinforce what you already know. And it makes you think about all your biases that you may have in you, because he plays on all those biases. I've read this twice, like Ward Conley, who took away the affirmative action programs at UC Berkeley, says, diversity is America's newest religion. In academia, in the media, in our politics, and virtually every other vestige of our lives, we are summoned to celebrate our diversity. In reality, diversity has become a politically correct excuse to engage in social, ethnic, and sexual discrimination. He wrote that. This is a black man. From the Heights, which is the black section outside Sacramento. I take great pause in reading this, but I think like Ibrahim that talks about anti-racism, critical race theory, which is just talking about the stains on American history, not making our children feel that being white makes you a racist. That's, like many messages that get taken out of context. But I believe that when you're in a movement, it's not just a moment, it's continuous progress. The law firm business has come a long way, but it has so much work to do. But it's not impossible to get it done when you have like-minded people that do it for two reasons. It's right and it's profitable.
Yeah.
It's profitable, make it right, or a strategic plan for our future, and having a succession plan that is going to continue the name of the firm and the culture we have built. And the culture will expand or contract depending on who's running the firm. But if people take the time to really think about the world they really want to live in, being a diversity warrior is not a hard problem. It's not a problem at all because their children who are, I don't know what to call our children now. I know the millennials. I can't count after millennials. My head can't go back that far.
Yeah, Y, Z, yeah.
Yeah, those children live in a more diverse world. So the parents have to think about who Johnny and Sally and Tanisha's bringing over for lunch or dinner or the birthday party. They're going to be diverse. So if you want your firm to be diverse, think about your kids. If you want your biases, both conscious and unconscious, or implicit biases to be broken, you have to educate yourself on who you are. Beyond being a lawyer, but just being a parent, just being a partner, just being a person. The good thing about diversity and inclusion, and I'll leave it with this, it all comes down to humanity. It comes down to our nation, with all its flaws, becoming a more just, versatile, and equitable place to live. People kill themselves to come here, and there's a reason. It's a place that has promise, from Ellis Island to the Shenandoah Valley. There is no way that I could have done what I've done in this business or help come to start this business if it weren't for allies like you and Bobby and others. There are people that take their finger at you and say, like the Supreme Court case coming up against Harvard for Asian Americans. We live in a diverse world, so accept people the way they are, accept their cultures, respect their cultures, add more value as far as talent, and in a truly capitalist society, we'll make a lot of money. So,
that's beautifully said. I think, being honest with ourselves and being a little vulnerable is the first step, and confronting those biases because we all have them. Really well said, and really a great interview. I've really enjoyed this conversation, as I knew I would. We always muse together when we get on the phone. It's not all business, and I suspect that's how you've cultivated relationships so effectively over the years. But look forward to speaking with you off camera, and I just want to thank you for a wonderful podcast, and have a great rest of your week, my friend.
All right. Thank you, Greg. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
You too, Ron.
All right, man. Peace.